So hi, welcome to End Credit Reviews. It's just me, Tyler, this time from End Credit Reviews, and this is my review on The Running Man, or more specifically, the 2025 version of The Running Man. Now, with the 1987 version of the same name with Arnold Schwarzenegger, the first time I watched that movie was on cable when I was a kid, and it was like the second half of the movie that I'd catch on cable. It wasn't until the past several years that I sat down and watched the whole thing from start to finish, and it's a fine movie. It's your typical Arnold Schwarzenegger flick from the 80s. Definitely not one of his best movies, but definitely not one of his worst movies. So in this version is by Edgar Wright, who is best known for directing movies such as Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, and Baby Driver, which Baby Driver is one of my favorite movies from the 2010s, and I would argue that it is his best movie. So in this dystopian future, we have Ben Richards decides to enter the Running Man contest, so if he can survive 30 days without being killed, then he will be rewarded $1 billion. That way he can help not just himself, but also his family. So with The Running Man, or at least this version of The Running Man, I thought it was a fine movie. Now the things I liked about this movie was that, for one, I did like the world building with this movie. In a way, it did have technology that was kind of a throwback to the 1980s, but at the same time, it definitely copied the brutalist architecture, or at least showing the negative consequences of having brutalist architecture that's very depressing looking, especially in major cities. And also the satire in this movie too, when it came to showing the over-the-top violence in terms of game shows and also entertainment. Like when they're showing The Running Man, when it came to the logo and also various highlight reels, it definitely reminded me of what you would see on ESPN. And just showing how overly normalized violence and various degenerate acts were normalized in this world, or at least on the Running Man show in various forms of entertainment, is very reflective of the real world, because we see how it's been overly normalized in terms of how people have been desensitized to violence or swearing, or how the way certain people dress nowadays, either they underdress or they're showing just too much skin. I also like Glen Powell in this movie. He's definitely leading man material, and I also like Josh Brolin as the main villain of the movie, who is Dan Killian. Although this time they kind of make the main villain of the movie two separate characters. This time Josh Brolin's character is the villain of the movie, and the game show host character is played by Coleman Domingo. However, I thought that the 1987 version of the game show host guy was much better, mainly because of the fact that the guy was a host of Family Feud. One of the things I mixed about this movie would have to be the pacing, where sometimes it could be like The Running Man where you're into it, but sometimes it can feel like The Jogging Man, or maybe The Brisk Pace Man. There are times where this movie, I can get why they want to kind of take slow moments to do character building and other stuff like that. I'm fine with stuff in movies like that. But for an Edgar Wright movie, and especially for a movie called The Running Man, this movie should have been a lot leaner. And one way they could have fixed that, instead of 30 days, it should have just been 7 days. So that way you can make a lot more of a fast-paced, engaging movie. One of the negatives of this movie for me would have to be how Jamie Lawson is painfully miscast as the wife character to Glen Powell's character. They had no chemistry in this movie. It kind of reminded me of the non-existent chemistry between Bill Skarsgård's character and FKA Twigs' character in the 2024 Crow movie. In fact, I would argue that the character that Emilia Jones plays, who is this upper-class woman who gets held hostage in the second half of the movie, she had more on-screen chemistry with Glen Powell. Another negative of this movie would have to be the dialogue. I mean, there's some lines of dialogue that feels, especially in the second half of the movie, feels overly preachy and definitely needed to be polished up before the cameras would start rolling. I guess another final note I wanted to mention in terms of positivity would have to be some of the action scenes are well done, especially one moment in terms of this scene involving a plane. I'm not going to really spoil what happens on that one. And also a moment where Glen Powell's character is trying to escape a hotel where these hunters are onto him, and he's trying to figure out how I'm going to get out of the situation. So as for the 2025 version of The Running Man, I enjoyed parts of it. This movie definitely needed another rewrite and also needed better casting decisions, but I have to admit that I was just mildly disappointed with this movie, and I would highly recommend watching Predator Badlands over this movie. I had to choose between this or that Predator movie. So as for the 2025 version of The Running Man, I would give it about 2.5 stars out of 4. So anyway, this is Tyler from End Credit Reviews. I hope you enjoyed this episode of After the Credits on End Credit Reviews, and I hope to make a lot more in the future. Please like and subscribe.